We now move on to discussing the stock's household goods divisions. Let's give Pick'n Pay some airtime up front here, Chris.
Yeah, you know, they used to have a big exposure to this. They still do, I suppose, in terms of their hypermarkets, their general merchandising. Unfortunately, they kind of lost the plot there. And I think the way I would put it, macro came along and ate their lunch. In other words, they came along and put a lot of those big boxes in, and because Pick'n Pay had stopped the rollout of these hypermarkets to a very large extent, they came in and took the advantage. So yes, they're still there, but I don't think they're there to the extent that they could have been had they been on the ball with that one.
Paul, you can pick up a number of household goods from the Pick'n Pay environment, specifically on Nickel Way, your favorite spot.
But I think also Pick'n Pay, to be fair to them, have still enormous visibility and presence in that market. I think almost all hardcore shoppers would typically do, you know, a stop off there in the mall context, because everything from, you know, garbage bags to dishcloths to canned goods, all that kind of stuff.
Frying pans
and you're right. I mean, maybe if they're looking for something, if they're middle class people wanting to decorate the home, they're more likely to go to the likes of a Woolies or some sort of place where you get a fancy vase or new, you know, countertops and that sort of thing. But having said that, I think both players are in that space. It's a very competitive environment, so there's a real pressure on sourcing. But I think lately I've noticed that
Woolworths doesn't have an electrical goods component. Pick'n Pay does.
Not really. But even in
What do you mean not really? Can you buy a kettle at Woolworths?
I think you can. You can buy a certain range of items.
Yeah, it's small compared to, like, the range at Pick'n Pay is much larger, particularly in the hypermarkets.
Depends also on the scale of the Woolies store.
Well, let's not argue, because of course you are the Woolworths expert, so we take you at your word. Of course you can buy a kettle at Woolworths. So where are we on this discussion?
Look, I think this is not necessarily a big differentiating feature for either of these groups, and as I said, both of them have competition. Certainly ShopRite has been ferocious in this space. Macro, as Chris says, on the big box type environment, very huge. And then in the top end of the market, there's been a plethora of those kind of house and home and Waylands and, you know, all manner of those kinds of
Mr.
places.
Price at home.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a very tough space, and everybody is really only as good as their last buyers.
So both of these actually aren't so hot in the space in terms of the industry or the sector as a whole.
Yeah, and I suspect what you'll see in Woolies going forward is probably greater allocation of floor space to food and to the kind of clothing that's working, and a little bit less, you know, on the bedding and the vases and what have you.
Would you agree that we're probably going to see that same trend from Pick'n Pay as well?
Yes, but with Woolies, I think they have over the years been making more of a movement into that kind of home space. So they've been successful in it as well. So I think perhaps if you're talking who's in the lead there, I'd have to say Woolies.
Well, I'm going to go and see if I can buy a kettle from Woolworths a little later today. So ahead, we're saying Woolworths.
Yeah, I think
ahead,
so.
Woolworths.
Mm-hmm.